Hyunwoo checked his instruments for the third time that morning. The readings still made no sense. His ship, the Peaceful Dawn, had been approaching the Sol system for 2 weeks now. Everything about this mission should have been routine. First, contact with a new species was always exciting, but the Federation had done it hundreds of times before. The humans were supposed to be simple. Their radio signals suggested they had just started using basic electronics. Maybe they had chemical rockets by now, perhaps primitive satellites. The Federation's scouts had been watching them from a distance for decades, waiting for the right moment to make contact. "Captain, you need to see this," Mina called from the navigation station. Her voice carried a note of confusion that made Hyunwoo's stomach tighten. Mina had been navigating for 15 years. Nothing confused her anymore. Hyunwoo walked over to her station. The main display showed the Sol system spread out before them. 8 planets orbited a yellow star, exactly as expected. But there was something else. Something that shouldn't be there. "What am I looking at?" Hyunwoo asked. "That's what I'm trying to figure out," Mina replied. She pointed to a blip on the screen near the 3rd planet. "It's definitely artificial, definitely a ship. But look at these readings." Hyunwoo studied the data streaming across the screen. The numbers kept changing, but not in any pattern he recognized. The ship appeared to be moving, but also standing still. It registered as being made of metal, but also of something that didn't exist on any periodic table. "Taeho, come look at this," Hyunwoo called to their xenobiologist. Taeho hurried over from his research station. He was young for this kind of mission, but he had studied more alien species than anyone else in the Federation. His expertise in understanding new forms of life made him invaluable for first contact situations. "The sensors keep giving different readings," Taeho said after studying the display for several minutes. "It's like the ship is changing while we watch it. But that's impossible." "Run a full scan," Hyunwoo ordered. "I want to know everything about that vessel." Mina activated the ship's most powerful scanning array. The Peaceful Dawn was equipped with sensors that could analyze the atomic structure of objects from thousands of kilometers away. They could detect life signs, energy signatures, and technological levels with perfect accuracy. The scanner hummed to life. Then it made a sound none of them had ever heard before. A kind of confused beeping, like it was trying to process information that didn't make sense. "The scanners are malfunctioning," Mina reported. "They keep starting over like they can't understand what they're looking at." "That's not possible," Hyunwoo said. "These scanners can analyze anything." "Try the backup systems," Taeho suggested. Mina switched to the secondary scanners. The same thing happened. Then the tertiary scanners. Every system on the ship seemed unable to make sense of the human vessel. "Captain," Mina said slowly, "I think the problem isn't with our scanners. I think the problem is with what we're trying to scan." Hyunwoo stared at the display. The human ship sat there in space, looking perfectly normal except for the fact that it was breaking every piece of technology they had for understanding it. "How advanced are these humans supposed to be?" Taeho asked. "They just discovered radio," Hyunwoo replied. "Maybe basic spaceflight, chemical rockets at most. Then how did they build something our scanners can't analyze?" It was a good question. The Federation had encountered species with technology far beyond their own, ancient races that had been building starships for millions of years. Even then, their scanners could at least understand what they were looking at, even if they couldn't replicate it. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission," Mina announced. "From the human ship?" "Yes, sir. They're using a communication method I've never seen. before. It's not radio. It's not quantum. It's something else entirely. Can you decode it? Already done, sir. They're speaking perfect Federation standard. Hyun-woo felt a chill run down his spine. Federation standard was a complex language that took most species years to learn. How could a species that had just discovered radio be speaking it fluently? Put it through, he ordered. The main screen flickered and showed the bridge of the human ship. Hyun-woo had seen thousands of alien ships over his career, but this one was different. Everything looked too clean, too perfect. The technology visible in the background seemed to glow with its own inner light. A human male appeared on the screen. He was tall and had dark hair and calm eyes. He wore a uniform that looked simple, but somehow gave the impression of incredible sophistication. "Greetings," the human said. "I am Captain Do-hyun of the Earth vessel Defiance. We've been expecting you." "You've been expecting us?" Hyun-woo asked, trying to keep the surprise out of his voice. "Of course. We detected your approach 2 weeks ago. We've been preparing for this meeting." "How did you detect us?" "Our ships are equipped with the most advanced stealth technology in the galaxy." Captain Do-hyun smiled. It was a friendly expression, but something about it made Hyun-woo uncomfortable. "Your stealth technology is quite impressive. It would work perfectly against any known detection method." "But not against yours?" "We don't use known detection methods." Hyun-woo exchanged glances with his crew. This conversation was not going the way first contact was supposed to go. Usually the Federation ship was the one with all the advantages. They were the ones with superior technology and knowledge. "Captain Do-hyun," Hyun-woo said carefully, "our records indicate that your species has only recently achieved spaceflight. Yet your ship appears to be quite advanced." "That's correct. We've been in space for about 50 years. 50 years? And you built this?" Hyun-woo gestured at what little he could see of the human ship on the screen. "Actually, this ship is only 3 months old. We build new ones every few weeks now." Tae-ho made a choking sound. Even the most advanced species in the galaxy took years to build a single starship. The idea of building one every few weeks was absurd. "Perhaps we could meet in person," Captain Do-hyun suggested. "Your ship is welcome to dock with ours, or we could meet on a neutral station if you prefer." "We would be honored to visit your ship," Hyun-woo replied, though he wasn't sure honor was the right word. Curiosity, maybe, or concern. "Excellent. We'll extend a docking bay for you. Don't worry about compatibility issues. Our ship will adapt to yours." The transmission ended, leaving the 3 Federation officers staring at a blank screen. "Did he just say his ship would adapt to ours?" Mina asked. "That's what it sounded like," Tae-ho replied. Hyun-woo watched as the human ship began to change. What had looked like a smooth, seamless hull started growing extensions. A docking bay appeared where none had been before, perfectly sized for the peaceful dawn. "How is that possible?" Mina whispered. "I don't know," Hyun-woo admitted. "But I think we're about to find out." As they approached the human ship, Hyun-woo couldn't shake the feeling that everything they thought they knew about the universe was about to change. The Federation had always been the advanced civilization making contact with primitive worlds, but looking at the impossible ship growing a docking bay out of nothing, he wondered if this time they were the primitive ones. The docking bay sealed around the peaceful dawn with a soft hiss. Hyun-woo had expected the usual mechanical sounds of airlocks connecting and pressure equalizing. Instead, it felt like the human ship had simply embraced their vessel and made it part of itself. Captain Do-hyun was waiting for them in the airlock. He stood with 3 other humans, all wearing the same simple but sophisticated uniforms. The woman beside him had short black hair and alert eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Next to her stood a man who looked like he understood machines better than people. The 4th human was a woman who carried herself like someone who spent her time thinking about impossible things. "Welcome aboard the Defiance," Captain Do-hyun said, with that same calm smile. "This is my chief engineer, Yoon-ji, tactical officer Woo-jin, and science officer So-young." Hyun-woo introduced his own team. As they shook hands, he noticed that the human ship felt different under his feet. Not wrong exactly, but like it was more solid than it should be, like it existed more completely than other ships. "Your vessel is quite impressive," Hyun-woo said as they walked through corridors that seemed to glow with their own light. "Thank you," Engineer Yoon-ji replied. "She's one of our better attempts." "Attempts at what?" "Making something that works the way it should work," she said, as if that explained anything. The corridors were wider than they needed to be, and somehow gave the impression of being even larger than they actually were. The walls were smooth but not metallic. They looked like they were made of crystallized starlight, if such a thing were possible. "What material is this?" Tae-ho asked, running his hand along the wall. "It's complicated," Science Officer So-young answered. "We convince matter to be more than it usually is." "I'm sorry, what?" "Most materials have limits. We asked this one to not have limits, and it agreed." Mina stopped walking. "You asked matter to not have limits?" "It's easier than you'd think," So-young said. "Matter wants to be useful. It just needs someone to explain what useful means." They reached what appeared to be an observation deck. The wall became transparent as they approached, revealing a view of space that was clearer and more detailed than any viewport Hyun-woo had ever seen. But that wasn't what made him gasp. Outside, he could see his own ship. The peaceful dawn looked exactly the same as always, except for one impossible detail. It was glowing. A soft, warm light emanated from every surface. "What did you do to our ship?" he asked. "Nothing harmful," Captain Do-hyun assured him. "It's just happier now." "Happier? Your ship has been working very hard for a long time. Our docking bay convinced it to relax a little. The glow means it's running more efficiently than it ever has before." Hyun-woo stared at his ship. In 30 years of service, the peaceful dawn had never glowed. Ships didn't glow. They especially didn't glow because they were happy. "Captain," Tactical Officer Woo-jin said, "perhaps our guests would like to see the bridge." The bridge of the Defiance was unlike anything in the Federation fleet. There were no visible controls, no banks of switches and displays. Instead, the walls themselves seemed to be the computer system. Information flowed across surfaces like living light, responding to gestures and sometimes to what appeared to be unspoken thoughts. "How do you operate without physical controls?" Mina asked. "The ship knows what we want," Captain Do-hyun explained. "We just have to want it clearly." "You control the ship with your thoughts?" "Not exactly. We control it with our intentions. The ship understands intentions better than thoughts." Engineer Yoon-ji approached one of the flowing walls. "For example," she said, "right now I intend to show our guests our power systems." The wall immediately began displaying a schematic that made no sense to anyone but her. Hyun-woo studied the display. It showed what looked like a star contained in a box no larger than his fist. "What am I looking at?" "Our reactor," Yoon-ji said. proudly. We start with a normal fusion reaction, then we convince space to fold around it, so the reaction thinks it has more room than it actually does. The result is a star that fits in a closet, but still produces the energy of a star. That's impossible, Tejo said flatly. It would be if space couldn't fold. But space is much more flexible than most people think. You just have to ask it nicely. You asked space to fold? We asked it to be more useful. Folding was its idea. Science Officer So Young gestured to another part of the display. The interesting part is the temporal shielding. Since we're creating a pocket of space-time that doesn't match the rest of the universe, we needed to make sure time flowed correctly inside the ship. Temporal shielding, Hyunwoo repeated slowly. Time has a tendency to get confused around. Our technology, we found it easier to give the ship its own time flow rather than constantly fixing temporal paradoxes. Mina sat down heavily in the nearest chair. You're telling us that your ship exists in its own timeline? Only slightly, Captain Do-hyun said reassuringly. We're still synchronized with the rest of the universe for practical purposes. We just don't let outside time tell us how fast we should think. Hyunwoo looked around the bridge again. Every surface held technology that shouldn't exist. Every explanation he received made less sense than the one before. Yet here it all was, working perfectly. How long did it take your species to develop this technology? He asked. This ship was designed last month, Engineer Yoonji said. The basic principles took us about 5 years to figure out. 5 years? Your entire technological revolution happened in 5 years? Oh, no, Science Officer So Young corrected. 5 years for the current version. We've been improving reality for about 20 years now. Improving reality? Reality has a lot of room for improvement. Most species just accept it the way it is, but we thought we could do better. Tactical Officer Woo Jin spoke up. The weapons systems might interest you. We don't actually have weapons in the traditional sense. No weapons? Hyunwoo asked, relieved. We have something better. We have suggestions. Suggestions? If someone tries to attack us, we suggest to their weapons that they'd rather be flowers. Most weapons agree. They prefer being flowers. Hyunwoo stared at him. You turn enemy weapons into flowers only if they attack first. It seems more polite than destroying them. Engineer Yoonji brightened up. Would you like to see the engine room? It's really quite interesting. Before anyone could answer, she was leading them down another corridor that somehow rearranged itself to be exactly the right length for their walking pace. The engine room was vast, far larger than the ship itself could possibly contain. In the center stood something that hurt to look at directly. It wasn't quite a machine and wasn't quite alive, but it pulsed with purpose and seemed to be having a conversation with itself in mathematics. What is that? Tejo whispered. That's our drive system, Engineer Yoonji said fondly. It doesn't move us through space. It convinces space to rearrange itself so we're where we want to be. The engine talks to space? Space is very reasonable once you get to know it. It wants to be helpful. It just needs someone to explain what help means. Hyunwoo realized his hands were shaking. Everything he had learned about physics, about technology, about the nature of reality itself, was being casually overturned by these humans who spoke about impossible things as if they were everyday occurrences. Captain Do-hyun, he said carefully, how is any of this possible? The human captain considered the question seriously. We discovered that the universe is much more cooperative than anyone realized. Most species learn to work within the rules. We learned to explain to the rules why they should work differently. And the rules listened? The rules want to be fair. They just needed someone to point out that they weren't being fair to everyone. As they returned to the bridge, Hyun-woo caught sight of his ship again. The peaceful dawn was still glowing, and now it seemed to be moving with more grace than he had ever seen before. "What will happen when we undock?" he asked. "Your ship will remember how it feels to work this well," Science Officer So Young replied. "It won't forget." Hyun-woo realized that everything was about to change. Not just for him, not just for his crew, but for the entire galaxy. They had come to make first contact with a primitive species. Instead, they had found something that made the Federation look primitive, and the humans seemed genuinely happy to share. Science Officer So Young led them to what she called the laboratory, though it looked more like a place where reality went to get repaired. Workbenches held devices that seemed to exist in more dimensions than the room itself. Tools floated in, mid-air, waiting to be needed, while screens displayed equations that rewrote themselves as they watched. "This is where we figure out how to make things work better," So Young explained, picking up what appeared to be a simple metal cube. As soon as she touched it, the cube began cycling through different materials. First steel, then crystal, then something that looked like liquid fire, then back to metal again. "What is that?" Taeho asked, his scientific curiosity overcoming his confusion. "This is matter that's still deciding what it wants to be. We give it options, and it chooses." "Matter can't choose," Mina protested. "Why not? It has to be something. We just suggested it might want to have opinions about what that something is." So Young placed the cube on a workbench, and it settled into a form that was somehow more metallic than any metal Hyun-woo had ever seen. It looked like the perfect idea of what metal should be. "The interesting thing about your Federation," So Young continued, "is how much you limit yourselves. You've decided that physics works a certain way, so you only try things that should work according to those rules." "Because that's how physics works," Taeho said weakly. "Physics works however it needs to work. The rules aren't laws, they're more like suggestions. Very strong suggestions, but suggestions nonetheless." She gestured to a device on the far wall that appeared to be projecting a small galaxy. Stars swirled in perfect spirals while tiny planets orbited in patterns too complex to follow. "For example," So Young said, "everyone knows you can't create matter from nothing. Conservation of energy, conservation of mass, all very sensible rules. But what if instead of creating matter from nothing, you convinced nothing to become something for a while?" "That's the same thing," Hyun-woo objected. "Not really. Creation implies taking something that doesn't exist and making it exist. Convincing implies that existence was always possible, it just needed encouragement." The small galaxy on the wall pulsed, and suddenly there were twice as many stars, then half as many. Then they arranged themselves into a pattern that spelled outwards in a language none of the Federation officers recognized. "Those stars," Mina whispered. "Are they real?" "Define real," So Young replied cheerfully. "They exist. They produce light and heat. They have mass and gravitational fields. If you visited one, you could warm yourself by its fire. Are they real in the same way as the stars outside? That's a philosophical question." Engineer Yoon-ji joined them, carrying what looked like a fragment of the ship's hull. "I thought you might want to see this," she said to Hyun-woo. "It's the material we use for the outer hull." Hyun-woo accepted the fragment carefully. It felt warm and somehow alive. When he held it up to the light, it didn't just reflect illumination, it seemed to gather light from everywhere and concentrate it into something more than brightness. "What is it made of?" he asked. "Crystallized space-time," Yunji replied, as if that was a perfectly normal answer. "We convinced space and time to work together more closely than they usually do. Then we asked them to hold that shape." "You can't crystallize space-time," Taeho said, though his protest sounded half-hearted by now. "You can't crystallize space-time the way it normally exists," Yunji corrected. "But space-time is much more flexible than most people realize. It wants to be useful. It just needs someone to show it how." She took the fragment back and squeezed it gently. The material flowed. Like liquid, reformed itself into a perfect sphere, then returned to its original shape. The nice thing about crystallized space-time is that it remembers every useful shape it's ever been. If we need the hull to be something different, we just remind it of a time when it was that shape. "But it's never been any other shape," Mina pointed out. "Not yet," Yunji agreed, "but it could be. And since it exists partially outside normal time flow, could be and has been are sometimes the same thing." Science officer So Young led them to another workstation where mathematical equations wrote themselves in three-dimensional light. The symbols looked familiar, but they moved and changed as if they were alive. "Your mathematics is very conservative," she said to Hyunwoo. "You use it to describe what is. We use it to negotiate with what could be." "Mathematics doesn't negotiate," Taeho protested, though his voice lacked conviction. "Everything negotiates if you approach it correctly. Mathematics is just the universe's way of keeping track of agreements. Most species learn the existing agreements and work within them. We learn to propose new agreements." She gestured to the flowing equations. "For example, these equations are discussing whether parallel lines should meet. Normally they don't, but we're asking them to consider special circumstances where meeting might be more useful than staying parallel." "What do they say?" "They're still thinking about it. Mathematics is very careful about changing its mind, but it's also very fair. If we can make a good argument for why parallel lines should sometimes meet, the equations will adjust accordingly." As if responding to her words, two parallel lines in the display suddenly intersected, created a brief spark of light, then returned to being parallel as if nothing had happened. "They're testing the idea," So Young explained. "If it works out, well, they might make it a permanent option." Engineer Eun-ji showed them to a fabrication unit that looked nothing like the industrial replicators used throughout the Federation. Instead of complex machinery, it appeared to be a simple alcove where light gathered and danced. "How does it work?" Mina asked. "We describe what we want, and the light arranges itself into that shape," Yunji explained. "Light is very good at being things. It just usually doesn't get the chance." She spoke to the device in words that sounded like a cross between engineering specifications and poetry. The light in the alcove swirled, condensed, and formed itself into a perfect replica of Hyunwoo's communicator. Then it became a flower. Then it became a small bird that chirped once before dissolving back into light. "The light enjoys being different things," Yunji said fondly. "It gets bored just traveling in straight lines all the time." Hyunwoo picked up the communicator replica. It felt exactly like the original, down to the weight and texture. When he activated it, it worked perfectly, connecting to his ship's systems as if it had always been part of the Federation fleet. "How is this possible?" he asked. For what felt like the 100th time. "Light carries information," Science Officer So Young explained. "Usually that information is just about color and brightness. But light is capable of carrying much more complex information if you know how to ask it. We asked the light to carry the information of being a communicator, and it agreed. They moved to another station where what appeared to be empty space was carefully contained in a transparent sphere. Inside the sphere, nothing was happening very energetically. "This is our most important discovery," So Young said proudly. "Active. Nothing." "Nothing can't be active," Taeho said, though he seemed to be saying it more for form's sake than from conviction. Normal nothing can't be active. But this nothing has agreed to have potential. It's nothing that's ready to become something the moment we need it to be something. "What do you use it for?" "Everything," Engineer Yoonji replied. "When we need more space inside the ship, we convince some of this nothing to become space. When we need more time for a complex calculation, we ask it to become time. When we need matter for repairs, it becomes matter. Active nothing is very convenient," So Young added. "It's much easier to store than something, and it's always willing to help." As they concluded the tour of the laboratory, Hyunwoo felt his understanding of reality stretching to the breaking point. Everything he had learned, everything his civilization had achieved, was based on working within the limits of what was possible. These humans had somehow convinced the universe that those limits were more like guidelines. "Science Officer So Young," he said carefully, "how did your species learn to do these things?" "We started by questioning why things had to work the way they worked," she replied. "Most species accept that gravity pulls things together because that's what gravity does. We asked gravity why it preferred pulling to pushing and whether it might consider other options. And gravity answered, gravity is very reasonable. It explained that pulling was just what it had always done, not necessarily what it had to do. When we suggested that selective pushing might be useful sometimes, gravity agreed to try it." "Your species negotiated with fundamental forces?" "We negotiated with everything. Forces, particles, concepts, mathematical principles. It turns out the universe is very collaborative once you start treating it as a partner instead of a set of rules to work around." Engineer Yoonji smiled. "The universe wants to be helpful. It just needed someone to ask for help instead of demanding obedience." As they returned to the bridge, Hyunwoo realized that his report to the Federation Council would be the most important document ever written. They had not just made contact with a new species. They had found a civilization that had fundamentally changed their relationship with reality itself. And from everything he had seen, the humans were eager to share their discoveries with anyone interested in. Engineer Yoonji settled into what appeared to be a chair made of crystallized starlight and gestured for the Federation officers to make themselves comfortable. The chairs that formed around them were somehow perfectly suited to each individual's anatomy, despite being made of the same flowing light material as everything else on the ship. "You seem confused," Yoonji observed with a gentle smile. "That's normal. Most species go through a period of confusion when they first encounter our approach to problem solving. Your approach seems to ignore every principle of technological development we've ever observed," Hyunwoo said carefully. "That's because your principles assume development has to be slow and gradual," Yoonji replied. "You assume you have to understand something completely before you can improve it. We discovered that understanding and improving can happen at the same time." Taeho leaned forward. "But technological advancement requires building on previous knowledge. You can't just skip steps." "Why not?" Engineer Yoonji asked. "If you know where you want to go, why not just go there?" "Because you need to develop the intermediate technologies first. You need the tools to build the tools to build the tools. Only if you accept that tools have to be built the traditional way." Yunji gestured to the wall, which immediately displayed a schematic of something that looked like a hammer, except it existed in 11 dimensions and seemed to be having a philosophical discussion with itself. "This is a tool we made yesterday," she explained. "We needed to shape crystallized space-time, but no existing tools could do that. So instead of spending centuries developing the metallurgy and engineering necessary to build such a tool, we explained to raw materials what kind of tool we needed and asked if they wanted to volunteer." "Materials can't volunteer," Mina protested weakly. "Why not? Everything in the universe is made of the same basic components. Atoms don't care whether they're part of a rock or part of a tool. They just need someone to explain the difference. And ask, politely." The hammer thing on the display rotated through dimensions that hurt to look at directly. As it moved, it left trails of possibility that showed all the things it could shape and all the ways it could help. "The beautiful thing about asking instead of demanding," Yunji continued, "is that the materials often suggest improvements you never would have thought of. This tool proposed its own dimensional flexibility. We just wanted something that could shape space-time. It suggested that it could shape space-time in ways that made space-time more useful." Science Officer So Young joined them, carrying what appeared to be a cup of coffee that glowed softly and smelled like mathematics. "Yunji is being modest," So Young said. "Her real breakthrough was realizing that the universe has feelings about how it's treated. Most species treat the universe like a machine to be operated. Yunji started treating it like a colleague to be consulted." "The universe has feelings?" Hyunwoo asked. "Everything has feelings if you pay attention," Yunji replied. "Machines want to work properly. Materials want to be useful. Energy wants to flow efficiently. Space wants to contain things helpfully. Time wants to pass meaningfully. But those aren't feelings. Those are just properties. What's the difference? If something consistently behaves as if it wants to be helpful and responds positively when you treat it helpfully and works better when you acknowledge its contributions, how is that different from having feelings?" So Young sipped her glowing coffee thoughtfully. "The breakthrough moment for our entire civilization came when one of our engineers apologized to a machine for overworking it. The machine started running more efficiently. That's when we realized we'd been approaching technology all wrong." "You apologized to a machine?" "Yunji did, actually. She was working on a prototype engine, pushing it beyond its design specifications for the 100th time that day. She felt bad about making it work so hard, so she said sorry and promised to find a way to make its job easier." Engineer Yunji looked slightly embarrassed. "I felt foolish doing it, but the engine immediately started running smoother. Its efficiency increased by 30%. When I asked it what it needed to work better, it showed me design improvements I never would have considered." "The engine showed you improvements?" "Through vibration patterns, heat distribution, stress indicators. Machines are always trying to communicate what they need. We just usually ignore them and demand they work anyway." Tactical Officer Wu Jin approached their group, moving with the easy confidence of someone who had never encountered a problem he couldn't solve. "Are you telling them about the sympathy protocols?" he asked. "Sympathy protocols?" Hyunwoo repeated. "Our approach to conflict resolution," Wu Jin explained. "Most species build bigger weapons to solve bigger problems. We learn to understand what the problems actually want. Problems want things. Everything wants things. Problems usually want to be solved. Conflicts usually want to be resolved. Violence usually wants to be prevented. The trick is asking them what they need instead of just fighting them." Mina shook her head slowly. "You're telling us that you resolve conflicts by asking the conflict what it wants? It works remarkably well. Most conflicts are just miscommunications that have gotten out of hand. When you approach the conflict itself as something that wants to be resolved, you often find that resolution is much easier than anyone expected. Wu Jin gestured to a display that showed what appeared to be a battle between two fleets of starships. But instead of explosions and destruction, the ships were dancing. Their weapons fire had become streams of light that painted beautiful patterns in space. This was a territorial dispute we mediated last month, he explained. Two species fighting over a star system, both convinced the other side was trying to destroy them. We asked the conflict what it really wanted, and it turned out it wanted the two species to share the system because they had complementary needs. How do you ask a conflict what it wants? The same way you ask anything what it wants. You pay attention to its behavior, you consider its perspective, and you treat it as something that has preferences rather than something that just happens randomly. Engineer Yun-ji pulled up another display showing the construction of a Federation-style starship next to the construction of a human vessel. The Federation ship was being assembled piece by thousands of workers and machines. The human ship was growing like a plant, each new section flowing naturally from the previous one. Your approach to building things is very forceful, she observed. You decide what you want, then you make materials conform to your design, whether they want to or not. How else would you build something? You could ask the materials what they're good at, then design something that lets them do what they do best. You could ask the tools what they enjoy making, then make things they're excited to build. You could ask the space where you're building what kind of structure would make it happy. The display showed the human ship responding to the space around it, adjusting its shape to complement the gravitational fields and energy patterns of its environment. Instead of imposing itself on space, it was collaborating with space to create something that worked better for everyone. But that would take forever, Taeho protested. You'd have to negotiate with every component. Actually, it's much faster, So Young said. When materials are doing what they want to do, they work more efficiently. When tools are building things they're excited about, they rarely break down. When structures are designed to work with their environment instead of against it, they require almost no maintenance. This ship was fully constructed in 6 days, Yunji added. The materials were so enthusiastic about the design that they organized themselves. We mostly just had to provide encouragement. Hyun-woo stood up and walked to the main display, which was showing a view of his own ship. The peaceful dawn was still glowing with that soft, warm light, and he could see that his crew was running diagnostics that were returning the best performance readings in the ship's history. What you're describing, he said slowly, isn't just advanced technology. It's a completely different way of thinking about reality. Exactly, Captain Do-hyun said, joining the conversation. Most species learn to work within the constraints of reality. We learned that reality is much more flexible than anyone realized, but only if you approach it as a collaboration instead of a conquest. Your entire civilization is based on asking nicely? Our entire civilization is based on recognizing that everything in the universe is trying to be helpful, but most of the time, no one bothers to ask for help in a way that makes help possible. Engineer Yunji smiled. The universe is very generous. It just needs to be treated generously in return. As Hyun-woo looked around the bridge of the Defiance, watching technology that shouldn't exist working perfectly because it had been asked to work rather than forced to work, he realized that the humans hadn't just developed impossible technology, they had developed an impossible relationship with possibility itself, and somehow impossibility had decided to cooperate. The emergency session of the Galactic Federation Council had been called within hours of receiving Hyun-woo's initial report. Admiral Q Sung stood before the assembled representatives of 400 species, holding a data pad that contained information that would reshape their understanding of everything. "Council members," Admiral Q Sung began, his voice carrying the weight of 30 years of military service. "We have a situation that has no precedent in Federation history." The Great Hall fell silent. Representatives from across the galaxy leaned forward in their seats, sensing that something fundamental was about to change. Counselor Ye Jin, the Federation's senior diplomat, activated the main display. It showed the peaceful Dawn docked with the human vessel, both ships glowing with that impossible warm light. 3 days ago, Captain Hyun-woo made routine first contact with a species called humans from the Sol system, she announced. "What he found challenges every assumption we have about technological development, physics, and the nature of reality itself." The council chamber erupted in confused murmurs. The Zentari representative raised one of his 4 arms. "Counselor Ye-jin, surely you're exaggerating. No single species could challenge our understanding of reality." "Admiral Q Sung," Ye-jin said, "please share Captain Hyun-woo's technical reports." Admiral Q Sung activated his data pad, and the main display began showing footage from inside the human ship. Council members watched in growing amazement and alarm as Engineer Yoon-ji demonstrated matter that chose its own form, and Science Officer So Young showed them mathematics that negotiated with itself. "This is impossible," declared the Vorthak representative, her voice carrying the authority of a species that had been building starships for 50,000 years. "Technology doesn't work this way." "That's what we thought too," Admiral Q Sung replied grimly. "But our sensors confirm everything in this footage. We've run the data through every analysis system in the fleet. The humans aren't using advanced technology. They're using impossible technology." The Kelleran representative stood up, his crystalline form catching the light from the displays. "There must be an explanation. Ancient technology, perhaps? Artifacts left by a vanished civilization?" "We considered that," Counselor Ye-jin said. "But our investigation shows that humans developed all of this themselves. Their oldest starship is less than 50 years old. Most of their technology was developed in the last 20 years. 50 years? The voice belonged to the Etherian ambassador, a being whose species had taken 5,000 years to achieve interstellar flight. They went from chemical rockets to reality manipulation in 50 years? According to their records, yes. And they're still accelerating. Captain Do-hyun informed Captain Hyun-woo that they build new ships every few weeks now, each one more impossible than the last. Admiral Q Sung brought up another display showing comparative technology analyses. "Our best scientists estimate that human technology is advancing at a rate that violates every known model of technological development. They're not just ahead of us. They're ahead of where we thought it was possible to be." The chamber fell into an uneasy silence as the implications sank in. The Federation had always been the most advanced civilization in the galaxy. They were the ones who made contact with primitive species and guided them toward enlightenment. The idea that they were now the primitive ones was difficult to process. Counselor Ye-jin gestured to a side display showing fleet deployment maps. "Admiral Q Sung, what are our strategic options?" "That's the problem," Admiral Q Sung replied. "We don't have strategic options. Our entire fleet couldn't threaten a single human ship. Their defensive capabilities alone make our weapons irrelevant. And their offensive capabilities." He paused, consulting his notes. Their tactical officer informed Captain Hyun-woo that they don't have weapons. They have suggestions. They suggest to attacking weapons that they should become flowers instead. Flowers? The Draxian representative laughed, a sound like grinding stone. That's absurd. We tested it, Admiral Q-sung said quietly. We asked Captain Do-hyun to demonstrate. He suggested to one of our target drones that it might prefer being a garden. The drone immediately transformed into a beautiful flowering bush that now decorates the Peaceful Dawn's observation deck. The laughter died immediately. They turned our military hardware into decorative plants, Admiral Q-sung continued. Without effort, without violence. The drone seemed happy about the change. Counselor Ye-jin activated another display showing economic projections. The implications go far beyond military concerns. Human technology could revolutionize every aspect of galactic civilization. Their understanding of matter manipulation alone could end resource scarcity forever. Or it could end our economies, pointed out the Mercantile Guild representative. If they can convince matter to become anything they want, what happens to mining, manufacturing, trade? According to Captain Hyun-woo's report, Ye-jin replied, the humans are eager to share their knowledge. They seem to view their discoveries as gifts that should benefit everyone. The Zentari representative stood again. That's even more concerning. A species that powerful should be more protective of their advantages. Why would they share technology that makes them gods? Admiral Q-sung consulted his datapad again. Captain Do-hyun told Captain Hyun-woo that hoarding useful knowledge was inefficient and unkind. He said the universe works better when everyone understands how to work with it properly. Work with it, repeated the Vorthak representative slowly. They don't see the universe as something to conquer or control. They see it as something to collaborate with. Precisely. And apparently the universe enjoys the collaboration. Counselor. Ye-jin brought up a new display showing communication logs. We've been receiving signals from across Federation space. Every ship that has encountered human technology reports the same phenomenon. Their equipment starts working better. Their crews report improved morale. Even their food tastes better. Their presence improves everything around them? Asked the Etherian ambassador. It appears so. Captain Hyun-woo reports that the Peaceful Dawn is operating at 140% efficiency since docking with the human ship. Every system has improved beyond original specifications. The chamber buzzed with worried conversations. The Federation had maintained galactic peace for 10,000 years by being the strongest, most advanced civilization. If humans could make everyone stronger and more advanced just by being nearby, what did that mean for the existing order? Admiral Q-sung cleared his throat. There's more. The humans have requested a formal meeting with the Federation Council. They want to share what they call collaborative technology protocols with anyone interested in learning. They want to teach us how to do what they do? Counselor Ye-jin asked. More than that. They want to teach us how to think the way they think. According to Science Officer So Young, the technology isn't the important part. The important part is the relationship with reality that makes the technology possible. The Kelleran representative's crystalline form flickered with what might have been anxiety. They want to change how we think about existence itself. They want to offer us the choice, Admiral Q-sung corrected. Captain Do-hyun was very clear that they won't force their approach on anyone. They simply want to make it available to those who are interested. Counselor Ye-jin stood and addressed the chamber. Council members, we need to make a decision that will affect the future of galactic civilization. Do we treat the humans as a threat to be contained, or as teachers to be welcomed? What does Admiral Q Sung recommend? Asked the Draxian representative. Admiral Q Sung was quiet for a long moment. After reviewing all the data, after consulting with our best strategists and scientists, after considering every possible scenario, I recommend we ask them to teach us. Ask them? Our entire civilization is based on the idea that we know how the universe works. The humans have proven that we don't. They've shown us that the universe is far more cooperative and generous than we ever imagined. If they're willing to share that knowledge, he gestured to the display showing the glowing ships. Look at what happened to the peaceful dawn just from being near them. Imagine what could happen to our entire civilization if we learned to approach reality the way they do. Counselor Ye Jin nodded slowly. Then we're agreed? We welcome the humans as teachers, rather than treat them as threats? The vote was unanimous. For the first time in Federation history, they would ask a newly contacted species to teach them instead of the other way around. And somehow, that felt like the most natural decision they had ever made. Admiral Q Sung stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Vigilance, watching as 11 other Federation dreadnoughts took their positions around the human vessel. Each ship represented the pinnacle of 10,000 years of technological development. Their combined firepower could reduce a planet to atoms. The human ship, the Defiance, hung in space like a piece of crystallized starlight, looking serene and completely unconcerned by the formation of warships surrounding it. Admiral, his tactical officer reported, all ships are in position. Weapons are powered but not targeted, as per your orders. Good. Open a channel to Captain Do Hyun. The main screen flickered to life, showing the calm face of the human captain. Behind him, the bridge of the Defiance looked as peaceful as ever, with his crew working at their stations without any sign of alarm. Admiral Q Sung, Captain Do Hyun said with a slight smile. Thank you for accepting our invitation to test our capabilities. Your formation is quite impressive. Captain Do Hyun, I want to be clear about what we're doing here. This is a simulation, but we'll be using real weapons at reduced power. Our goal is to understand your defensive capabilities, not to cause harm. Understood, Admiral. We appreciate your caution. Are you ready to begin? Admiral Q Sung looked around his bridge. His crew was tense but professional. Every sensor was active, every system was optimized. 12 of the Federation's finest ships against one human vessel. We're ready, but Captain, I have to ask, where are your weapons? Our sensors don't detect any obvious armaments on your ship. We don't have weapons in the traditional sense, Captain Do Hyun replied. But don't worry about us. We'll be fine. On the Defiance, Tactical Officer Wu Jin looked up from his station with an expression of mild interest. Captain, they're about to begin. Should I activate the courtesy protocols? Please do. We don't want anyone to get hurt. Courtesy protocols? Admiral Q Sung asked, having overheard the exchange. It's what we call our defensive systems, Captain Do Hyun explained. We don't like the word defensive because it implies conflict. Courtesy protocols remind us that we're just trying to be polite to incoming energy. Admiral Q Sung decided not to ask what that meant. Beginning test sequence. All ships, fire when ready. 12 Federation dreadnoughts opened fire simultaneously. Beams of concentrated energy that could pierce any known armor lanced out toward the human ship. At the same moment, every sensor on every Federation vessel began reporting impossible readings. The energy beams didn't hit the Defiance. They didn't bounce off shields or get absorbed by armor. Instead, they simply stopped. In mid-space, the beams came to a gentle halt, hanging in space like frozen lightning. "What just happened?" Admiral Q Sung demanded. "The energy seems confused," his science officer reported. "It's just hanging there, like it's waiting for instructions." On the Defiance, Wu Jin was speaking softly to his control interface. "Thank you for coming to visit us," he said to the hanging energy beams. "We appreciate the attention, but we don't really need to be shot at right now. Perhaps you'd like to do something more constructive instead?" The energy beams flickered, pulsed, and then began to move again. But instead of continuing toward the human ship, they started painting patterns in space, beautiful, complex geometric forms that pulsed with captured starlight. "Did he just ask our weapons to stop shooting?" Admiral Q Sung asked weakly. "It appears so, sir," his tactical officer replied. And they listened. But that wasn't the strangest part. Admiral Q Sung watched in amazement as the displays around his bridge began showing system improvements. Shield efficiency was up 30%. Engine performance had increased. Even the lights seemed brighter and more pleasant. "Sir," his engineering officer called out, "our weapons array just optimized itself. I'm reading performance improvements across all systems." The same reports were coming in from all 12 ships. Every vessel in the Federation formation was operating better than it ever had before. "Captain Do Hyun," Admiral Q Sung said carefully, "what did you do to our ships?" "Nothing harmful," the human captain replied. "Your ships were working very hard to hurt us, which seemed stressful for them. We suggested they might be happier doing what they do best instead of what they were being forced to do. What they do best? Keeping people safe, exploring space, fostering communication between species, all the things ships really want to do. Fighting is just something they're sometimes forced to do." Engineer Yoonji's voice came over the communication channel. "Your ships have beautiful potential. They were just being asked to use their energy for destruction instead of creation. We showed them how they could use the same energy more constructively." Admiral Q Sung looked at his displays. Every system on his ship was performing beyond specifications. His crew was reporting improved morale. Even the artificial gravity felt more comfortable. "You improved our ships while we were attacking you?" "You weren't really attacking us," Captain Do Hyun said gently. "You were testing us. Your ships knew the difference, even if their programming didn't. They were happy to participate in a test. That would help everyone understand each other better. But we fired at you with enough energy to destroy a space station. And that energy was very impressive. It just preferred being art to being destruction. We asked it to choose, and it chose. Tactical." Officer Wu Jin spoke up from his station. "Admiral, your weapon systems are really quite sophisticated. They have much more potential than just breaking things. Would you like us to show you some of the other things they can do?" Before Admiral Q Sung could answer, his weapons arrays began to hum with new purpose. Instead of charging for destruction, they were creating. Beams of light reached out from his ship and began building structures in space. Delicate frameworks of crystallized energy that served as communication relays, environmental processors, even what appeared to be works of art. "How is this possible?" he whispered. "Every tool can be used for creation or destruction." "Science," Officer So Young explained. "Most species focus so much on the destruction part that they forget about the creation part. Your weapons are very good at manipulating energy. We just reminded them that manipulation doesn't have to mean destruction." Admiral Q Sung walked to his main display and stared at the formation of Federation ships. Each vessel was now surrounded by beautiful constructions of light and energy. His fleet looked like a gathering of artists rather than warriors. Captain Do-hyun, he said slowly. We came here to test your defenses. Instead, you've shown us that our own ships are capable of things we never imagined. That's because you are capable of things you never imagined, Captain Do-hyun replied. Your entire species is. You just need someone to remind you occasionally. But we never learned to do any of this. You never needed to learn it. You already knew it. You just needed permission to remember. As Admiral Q-sung watched his ships creating beauty instead of preparing for destruction, he realized that the test had revealed far more about the Federation than about the humans. The humans hadn't defended against the Federation fleet. They had shown the Federation fleet how to be better than it knew it could be. Captain Do-hyun, Admiral Q-sung said, I think we need to discuss changing our relationship. We'd be honored to, Admiral. But first, would you like to see what your ships can build when they're really excited about a project? Looking at the impossible beauty surrounding his fleet, Admiral Q-sung decided that he very much would. The test was over. The real learning was about to begin. Science Officer So Young stood before the assembled representatives of the Galactic Federation, her simple human form somehow commanding the attention of beings who had been studying the universe for millennia. The Great Council Chamber had been reconfigured for this unprecedented event, a human teaching session for the galaxy's most advanced minds. Thank you all for coming, So Young began, her voice carrying easily through the vast space. I know this situation is unusual. Typically, the Federation teaches new species about galactic civilization. Today, we're going to explore a different approach to understanding reality itself. Admiral Q-sung sat in the front row, still amazed by what his fleet had accomplished during the test. Beside him, the lead scientists from dozens of species leaned forward with expressions of fascination and barely controlled frustration. Before we begin, So Young continued, I want to address the question everyone is thinking. How did a species that discovered radio yesterday suddenly develop technology that violates everything you know about physics? Dr. Keltar, the Federation's chief physicist, raised one of his tentacles. That's exactly what we want to know. Your technology appears to break fundamental laws. That's your first misconception, So Young replied gently. We don't break laws, we don't even bend them. We simply discovered that what you call laws are actually more like preferences. She gestured, and the air in front of her began to glow. Mathematical equations wrote themselves in light, but these equations moved and shifted as if they were alive. For example, you have a law that says energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed. This is true, but you've interpreted it to mean that the amount of useful energy in any system must decrease over time. We asked the energy if it agreed with that interpretation. You asked energy? Dr. Keltar's voice carried the strained patience of someone whose worldview was being systematically dismantled. Energy has opinions about how it's used. Most of the time, those opinions are ignored. When you force energy to do things it doesn't want to do, it becomes less efficient. When you work with energy's natural preferences, it becomes more efficient. Engineer Yoon-ji stepped forward, carrying what appeared to be a simple battery. May I borrow your personal communicator, Dr. Keltar? The physicist handed over his device, which immediately began glowing with the same warm light they had seen on Federation ships. Your communicator was working at about 60% efficiency, Yoon-ji explained. The energy flowing through. It was frustrated because the design forced it to take inefficient paths. We asked the energy what it would prefer, and it showed us. The communicator's display lit up with performance readings that were 30% better than its original specifications. "You didn't modify the hardware," Dr. Keltar observed, studying his device in amazement. "We didn't need to. We just gave the energy permission to flow the way it wanted to flow. Your hardware was already capable of this performance. It just needed encouragement." "But that's impossible. Energy doesn't have wants or preferences." "So," Young smiled. "Does it? Or have you just never asked?" She gestured again, and the floating equations rearranged themselves into a new pattern. The key insight that changed everything for humanity was realizing that consciousness isn't unique to biological life. Everything in the universe has some degree of awareness, some capacity for preference, some ability to choose. "Rocks are conscious?" asked Dr. Vellana from the Crystalline Collective. "Not conscious the way you are conscious, but aware, yes. Responsive to how they're treated. Capable of cooperation when approached respectfully." To demonstrate, So Young picked up what appeared to be an ordinary stone from the podium. As soon as she touched it, the stone began to glow softly. "This stone has been sitting on this podium for hours, supporting the weight of various objects, providing a stable surface. It's been doing its job well. We thanked it for its service and asked if there was anything it needed." "What did it need?" Admiral Q-Sung asked, despite himself. "Appreciation, mostly, and a chance to be more useful. It showed us that it could be a much better conductor of energy if we worked with its crystalline structure instead of ignoring it." So Young placed the stone on the podium's surface. Immediately, the entire podium began glowing with gentle efficiency. The holographic displays became clearer, the sound system became more precise, and even the lighting in the chamber improved. "The stone is sharing its improved conductivity with everything it touches," she explained. "Not because we forced it to, but because it wants to be helpful." Dr. Keltar stood up abruptly. "This contradicts everything we know about material science." "No," Engineer Yunji said patiently. "It expands everything you know about material science. You've been studying materials as objects. We study them as partners. But how do you communicate with them? How do you ask a stone what it wants?" "The same way you communicate with anyone," So Young replied. "You pay attention to how they respond to different treatments. You notice what makes them work better and what makes them work worse. You treat them as if their contributions matter." She gestured to the flowing equations, still dancing in the air above them. "Mathematics works the same way. You've been using mathematics to describe reality. We use mathematics to negotiate with reality." The equations suddenly rearranged themselves into words. "Hello, Dr. Keltar. We enjoy being used to understand the universe. Thank you for spending your life working with us." Dr. Keltar stared at the mathematical greeting for a long moment. "The equations are talking to me?" "They've been trying to talk to you your entire career," So Young said gently. "You just never realized they were capable of conversation." Engineer Yunji addressed the wider audience. "The real breakthrough for humanity came when we stopped seeing ourselves as separate from the universe and started seeing ourselves as part of a collaborative system. Instead of trying to control reality, we learned to work with it." "But how?" demanded Dr. Vellana. "How do you learn to communicate with fundamental forces?" "You start small," Yunji replied. "You thank your tools for working well. You apologize to your machines when you overwork them. You ask your materials what they're good at instead of just telling them what to do. And they respond. Everything responds to being treated with respect. It just responds in ways you haven't been trained to notice." So Young walked closer to the assembled scientists. Here's what I want you to try. Tonight, when you return to your laboratories, try treating your equipment as partners instead of tools. Thank your computers for processing data. Ask your sensors what they need to work better. Apologize to your instruments when you push them beyond their limits. You want us to talk to our equipment? Dr. Keltar asked. I want you to acknowledge that your equipment has been trying to help you understand the universe for your entire career. And that maybe, just maybe, it has insights you haven't considered. Admiral Q Sung raised his hand. Science Officer So Young, this approach obviously works for humans. But how do we know it will work for other species? Because it's already working, So Young replied. Every ship that's encountered our technology has improved. Every tool that's been treated with respect has responded positively. The universe doesn't care what species you are. It just cares how you treat it. Engineer Yunji nodded. The universe wants to be helpful. It's been waiting for species to ask for help instead of demanding obedience. But why humans? Dr. Valana asked. Why did your species discover this? Approach first? So Young considered the question carefully. I think it's because humans have always been very good at seeing potential in things. We look at a stick and see a tool. We look at empty space and see a place to build something. We look at problems and see opportunities. More importantly, Yunji added, humans have always believed that things should be better than they are. Other species learn to accept limitations. Humans tend to assume that limitations are temporary inconveniences that can be negotiated away. So when we encountered the limitations of physics, So Young concluded, we didn't accept them as permanent. We asked physics if it was sure about those limitations and whether it might consider some alternatives. And physics agreed to consider alternatives. Physics turned out to be much more flexible than anyone expected. It just needed someone to suggest that flexibility was possible. As the session concluded, Dr. Keltar approached the podium where the glowing stone still rested. Hesitantly, he reached out and touched it. Thank you, he whispered to the stone, for everything you've helped us build and understand. The stone's glow brightened noticeably, and Dr. Keltar felt a strange sense of connection to the simple mineral that had somehow become something more. Looking around the chamber at the expressions of wonder and possibility on faces from across the galaxy, So Young realized that the real work was just beginning. The universe had been waiting a long time for someone to ask it how to work together. Now, finally, the conversation could begin in earnest. 6 months after first contact, the Galactic Federation had transformed beyond recognition. Counselor Ye Jin stood in what had once been the war room of Federation headquarters, watching through transparent walls as ships from across the galaxy worked together to build something that shouldn't have been possible. They were constructing a living space station. Not a space station that supported life, but one that was itself alive, grown from materials that had volunteered to become habitat. The structure pulsed gently with its own heartbeat, breathing in cosmic radiation and breathing out clean energy for its inhabitants. Counselor Ye Jin, Admiral Q Sung said as he approached, the humans have arrived for the formal ceremony. She turned to see Captain Do Hyun and his crew walking across the observation deck. They moved with the same calm confidence they had shown from the beginning, but now they were accompanied by representatives from dozens of species, all of them glowing with the soft light that had become the signature of human-influenced technology. Captain Do Hyun, Ye Jin said, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting that had become popular throughout the Federation. Thank you for coming. Though I suppose we should be thanking you for much more than that. The pleasure is Ours, Counselor, though I notice you're giving us far more credit than we deserve. Look around you. Everything you see was built by Federation species using Federation materials and Federation labor. We just suggested a few different approaches. Engineer Yunji smiled as she gestured toward the living station. Actually, the station was the materials idea. We just asked them what they'd like to become, and they suggested something that could think for itself. It's still hard to believe, Admiral Q-Sung admitted. 6 months ago, we thought we understood the limits of technology. Now we're building with materials that make suggestions and using tools that improve themselves. Science Officer So Young joined the conversation, carrying a data pad that displayed itself in whatever format was most comfortable for whoever was looking at it. The beautiful thing is that none of this required new technology. You always had everything you needed. You just needed a new perspective on what was possible. Through the transparent walls, they could see Dr. Keltar working with a team of mixed-species engineers. The elderly physicist had become one of the most enthusiastic advocates of collaborative technology, spending his days having conversations with fundamental forces and emerging with insights that revolutionized entire fields of study. Dr. Keltar published 17 research papers last month, Yejin observed. He says mathematics has been trying to tell us things for centuries, but we weren't listening properly. Mathematics is very patient, So Young replied, but it appreciates finally having someone to talk to. The ceremony they were gathering for was unprecedented in galactic history. Instead of a new species petitioning to join the Federation, the AO Federation was formally restructuring itself around principles that humanity had introduced. The Galactic Collaborative, as it would now be called, was based on partnership rather than hierarchy, cooperation rather than control. Captain Do-hyun, Yejin said, I have to ask, your ship, the Defiance, you told Captain Hyun-woo that it wasn't even your most advanced vessel. How much more impossible can human technology become? Captain Do-hyun exchanged glances with his crew, and they all smiled. Actually, we wanted to show you something. May we? Before anyone could answer, the space outside the observation deck began to change. What had appeared to be empty space started to shimmer, then glow, then resolve itself into the most beautiful ship anyone had ever seen. It wasn't built of metal or crystal or any known material. Instead, it appeared to be constructed from crystallized possibilities from the dreams of space itself made manifest. It was large enough to hold a city, yet somehow gave the impression that it was exactly the right size for whatever it needed to be. This is the harmony, Captain Do-hyun said quietly. She's not just a ship. She's a mobile community, a place where species can come together to explore not just space, but new ways of existing. How long did it take to build? Admiral Q-Sung asked in wonder. She built herself, Engineer Yunji replied. Once we explained what we were hoping for, space itself volunteered to become the ship. It took about 3 days for space to figure out how to hold that shape permanently. Space volunteered to become a ship? Space gets lonely, Tactical Officer, Woo Jin explained. It spends most of its time being empty. The chance to be full of life and purpose and community was very appealing. As they watched, the Harmony began to extend docking bays toward the living station. But instead of mechanical connections, the ship grew tendrils of light that embraced the station like old friends greeting each other. The Harmony is our gift to the galaxy, Captain Do-hyun said. A place where any species can come to learn, to teach, to explore new possibilities. She's excited to meet everyone. Counselor Yejin felt tears in her eyes. Captain, Your people have given us more than advanced technology. You've given us a new relationship with existence itself. We've given you what you always had, Science Officer So Young corrected gently. The universe has always been collaborative. It's always wanted to help. You just needed someone to point out that cooperation was possible. The formal ceremony began as representatives from 400 species gathered in the station's central chamber. But this wasn't the hierarchical assembly of the old Federation. Instead, beings of all kinds mingled freely, sharing ideas and perspectives in ways that would have been impossible before human contact. Hyun Woo, now serving as the first ambassador of collaborative relations, stepped forward to address the gathering. His own ship, the Peaceful Dawn, had become something of a legend. Still glowing with the warm light of improved efficiency, it had become a mobile embassy, spreading the collaborative approach to every system it visited. Friends, Hyun-woo began, 6 months ago I thought I was making routine first contact with a primitive species. Instead, I discovered that we were the ones who had been thinking primitively. A gentle wave of laughter rippled through the assembly. It was a different kind of laughter than the old Federation would have produced, warmer, more inclusive, touched with the joy of shared discovery. Today, we're not just renaming our organization, Hyun-woo continued. We're acknowledging a fundamental truth that humans helped us remember. The universe is not something to be conquered or controlled. It's something to be befriended. Captain Do-hyun stepped forward. If I may, Ambassador Hyun-woo, I'd like to share something that might interest everyone. The central display activated, showing a map of the galaxy. But instead of the static territorial boundaries of the old Federation, this map pulsed with life. Trade routes glowed with actual energy, flows. Communication networks sparkled with real-time information exchange. And everywhere, systems were connected by threads of light that represented collaborative projects. This is the galaxy as it exists today, Captain Do-hyun explained. 6 months of species learning to work with their technology instead of against it. 6 months of asking the universe what it wants instead of demanding what we want. The map zoomed in to show individual systems where impossible projects were taking place. Planets were being healed by materials that volunteered to become soil. Stars were being asked to burn more efficiently, and they were agreeing. Even black holes were participating, using their gravitational fields to help accelerate ships rather than destroy them. But the most remarkable thing, Engineer Yoonji added, isn't the technology. It's what's happening to the species themselves. The display changed to show communication logs, research papers, artistic collaborations, and cultural exchanges happening at a rate that would have been unimaginable under the old system. When you stop fighting the universe, Science Officer, So Young observed, you have a lot more energy available for creating things. Dr. Keltar, now bearing the title of Chief Collaborative Scientist, approached the speaking area. His once formal bearing had been replaced by an enthusiasm that made him seem decades younger. I've learned more about physics in the past 6 months than in the previous 50 years of my career, he announced, and it's because I finally started listening to what the universe was trying to tell me. He gestured to a small device he carried, a crystal that pulsed with gentle light. This is a conversation crystal. It translates the preferences of matter, energy, space, and time into forms we can understand. Every species can now communicate directly with the fundamental forces. What do they say? Asked Dr. Vellana, her crystalline form resonating with curiosity. Mostly they say thank you, Dr. Keltar replied. Thank you for finally asking what they want instead of just telling them what to do. Thank you for treating them as partners instead of tools. Thank you for recognizing that they've been trying to help all along. Counselor Ye Jin stepped forward for the formal declaration. By the unanimous consent of all member species, and with the blessing of the universe itself, I declare the formation of the Galactic Collaborative. Our mission is no longer to explore strange new worlds and civilizations, but to befriend them. The ceremony concluded with something that would have been impossible in the old Federation. A collective meditation where every being in the chamber, from the smallest to the large,